everyone, welcome to Hub and Spoke, a storytelling platform produced by the J. Hurt Hub for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Davidson College. I'm your host, Liz Smith-Brigham, Davidson class of 2004, and director at the Hurt Hub at Davidson. Every other week, we'll feature Davidson alumni and other members of our community who've started their own businesses, who are investing in innovation, and who are at the leading edge of solving the world's most pressing challenges. Through these conversations, we hope to inspire and connect the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs leading lives of leadership and service. So let's jump in and welcome Cameron Hardesty, Davidson class of 07, CEO and founder of Poppy Flowers. Hey, Cameron.
Hey, Liz. Good to see you.
So in 2014, while working in the drug policy office at the White House, Cameron realized she was longing for creativity in her life. She started volunteering in the White House flower shop, learning floral design from chief floral designer Laura Dowling. Then Cameron went all in, leaving her job to join a major floral startup as head of products. In just 4 years, she helped them scale to become one of the largest e-commerce floral gifting companies. And during this time, Cameron also managed the florals for her own wedding, causing her to realize that an antiquated supply chain made wedding flowers more expensive than they had to be. She wanted to change that, so Poppy Flowers was born. All right, I'm excited to dig into this conversation. Cameron, I wanted, just start off as we started off a number of these Hub and Spoke conversations. If you could just walk us through your entrepreneurial journey, really starting from Davidson to today.
Yeah, that's a great question. You can hear me okay? Awesome. So you'll notice there's a gap in between when I graduated from Davidson in 2014, when I kind of truly started this journey in earnest. And I really did make a total career transition. So I would say leaving Davidson, the students now are in such a good position. They have the Hurt Hub, which is right behind you. But obviously, as you know, Liz, that didn't exist when we were at Davidson. And I didn't know really that entrepreneurship was a path that I could take professionally. And so I worked in communications as an English major for almost 7 years before I really made a transition. So I would say it really started with the decision to change my career. And I made that decision after a lot of thought and observation and seeing kind of the next steps beyond where I was in my communications career and realizing that wasn't where I saw myself going or wasn't where I necessarily wanted to go. And so I would say the first step is kind of determining that the corporate path wasn't for me. And then from there, I really honed in on what brought me joy. And for me, something that I had landed on was flowers. And actually that goes back to my Davidson time because I was an English major, but I especially focused on poetry at Davidson. And I didn't see a career path for myself in poetry that kind of aligned with what I expected my life to look like. And I saw flowers as a pathway back to that super creative time that Davidson was for me, in a way that also felt like commercially viable, I guess. And so I honed in on flowers way before I ever got into the startup world. That started in 2010 when I was still working in corporate communications at Edelman. And I just kept at it, and it was a hobby and it was something I loved. And I toyed with doing it professionally and realized that might not be the right fit for me, working in a flower shop. But the time, after a couple years, more than a couple of years, 4 years of sort of getting more and more into this hobby, the opportunity presented itself to, one, volunteer in the White House flower shop, and then two, sort of parlay that into an experience at Urban STEM. So I would say like the two sort of turning points were realizing, hey, I want something different out of my life or out of my career. And then secondly, honing in on the thing that just brought me joy before figuring out a way to monetize it or make it part of my career. But once I was able to do that in 2014, 2015, I got really serious about what the next 5 years would look like for me. And I had never been able to look that far into the future, I think, until I had really honed in on this thing that I loved. And so going into urban STEM, I knew that for me, it wasn't just the flowers that brought me to it. It was the flowers and the opportunity to learn how to build a business and a startup. And so I went into that experience knowing very clearly that I wanted to start a business on the other side. And I had no idea what that business would be. I figured I'd figure it out along the way, which I did. But that's kind of the long and short of it.
No, that's great. I wonder if you could speak to as well, maybe we can dig in on some of these really critical decision points, but did you have other role models or other people, obviously from the woman Laura Dowling at the White House, right? Clearly there, but more from the I want to build a business. I know this is my next step, as opposed to continuing on in somebody else's business, still very related to what you were passionate about, but not something that you were running yourself. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would say the timing of this particular relationship I'm about to share was so seminal. I had gotten involved with this mentorship program that a law firm here in DC was administering between women in business and in law. And I got connected with a woman who had been in government. She had been in the military. She left that world when she was 30 and started a leadership development company. And so she had been through a transition where super high achieving, like really on a track, and then totally switched gears. And she and I were paired in this like formal mentorship program, which is actually the only time I've ever done a formal program like that, for about 9 months. And during that transition was when I was considering leaving the drug policy office and going to work at Urban STEM. And that's when I really formulated this idea that like, hey, this isn't just switching careers. This is opening up a whole new set of opportunities for myself. And I could see in her the upside of starting your own business and really building out your own company. And I think that gave me a template for what it could look like for me one day. And one of the things she said to me that really stood out was like, look, you work in government. A lot of people may think it's crazy to leave such a stable job, but nothing is guaranteed. And the only thing that is like your career insurance is the network that you have and then the experience that you're developing. So the best thing you can do is invest in yourself and your growth and your network. And that's going to be a much safer bet than staying in what would be considered like a safe job or a safe career track. And I really took that to heart because I thought, if you look at it that way, staying here any longer is a detriment to my career if I know that I want to grow in a different direction. And taking what may look to be to others like a very risky choice is actually the more secure decision to make because I'm investing in myself and my growth. So I would say her name is Courtney Lynch. She we're still in touch periodically, but just in that moment, she was just incredibly helpful and really helped coach and guide me and gave me some inspiration. So yeah, it was very like circumstantial, but I think without that level of support from her, I'm not sure I would have had as much confidence in the decision to leave the White House Drug Policy Office and go to Urban STEMs, and also to know what's after Urban STEMs. What is the upside for me beyond just making this change?
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, mentorship is such a huge part of what we do here at the Hurt Hub, but also I think just sort of the ethos of Davidson in particular with faculty members and staying in touch with students over time. Could you speak a little bit to that of were there other faculty members or your experience as a soccer player, and congrats, shout out to the Davidson soccer team right now who are in contention to win the A10 championship in St. Louis. Amazing. But could you speak a little bit to that and how maybe there were other things besides poetry or your experience at Davidson that helped set you up to have that confidence to invest in yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I owe a lot to the English department. And the way that they taught me to think. And I wouldn't have known to use this word at the time, but I think the framework that they gave us to approach problems or challenges or thorny questions, I think particularly through literary analysis and like deeply studying text, that type of, and at the time I think I would have thought like, how am I ever going to relate Derrida and Cormac McCarthy to the real world? But looking back on it, it wasn't necessarily the content that guided my thinking. It was how I looked at the content and how I analyzed it that has, I think, set me up for success, both in communications and in business. Because I think that the way that I learned to think about analyzing texts and talking about them and being detailed and creating a thesis, that type of, I guess, kind of synthesizing information is very similar to the skill set you need as a CEO, where you're bringing in disparate pieces of seemingly kind of unconnected data and putting them all together into a business strategy, one, but two, particularly when you're fundraising or you're in the press, you're telling a story. That's really a huge chunk of my job, is like telling a story. And being able to tell a story effectively is, I think was like kind of the basis of the English major. So my honors thesis advisors were Alan Michael Parker, Dr. Churchill, and Henri Cole, who was a visiting professor at the time. And I think I owe a lot to them too for how supportive they were throughout my senior year. And I was probably a bit of a pill at times. And they were just so helpful and like sort of shepherding me through the process of the thesis in particular. So really, yeah, owe a lot to the English department. And then soccer has been a part of my life, or was part of my life. I don't play anymore, from age 5 all the way to graduation from Davidson. And so I would say what that provided me through college was really like a different college experience than some of my non-athlete friends. And it forced me to learn time management and, of course, discipline. I'm not saying non-athletes don't have those things. Like, I know that they do. To get through Davidson, you have to. But, there just wasn't a lot of slack in my schedule. And I got used to pushing myself really hard. And also, that's what you need to like get a business off the ground. From 0 to 1 is just a lot of willpower and discipline. And I think the combination of the academics and the athletics at Davidson is what prepared me so well for that challenge, I think.
Well, I could echo every single thing you said about the English department. I too was an English major, who pivoted into business and into tech, and your point is so well articulated on, I always talk about with students, connecting, being able to read 200 pages of text a night, and then the next day put that together with, data and research from other scholarly journals and put together a cogent argument and make it flow very well. I too, have spent my career in product management and product marketing, and storytelling is at the heart of everything that we do, regardless if you're talking about tech or non-tech or flowers or the White House or other things. So thank you for that. I was very proud. I was like, oh, we had very similar experiences, and shout out to some of our favorite professors. I want to talk a little bit about something that comes up pretty frequently on these conversations, but also just in general in our sort of tech ecosystem and startup ecosystem, which is funding. And, PitchBook has just released their data, I think at the beginning of March and for 2020, and said that women founders only captured 2% of the available venture capital funds in 2020. You have broken through that model and are an example of the 2%. Certainly, we have lots of opportunity to expand that. Can you talk a little bit about your journey in seeking venture capital, why you decided to go down that path, what made sense for your business? And we'll start there and kind of build on it.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I'll just say is that when you dive into that, like sort of double click into that data, the percentage is a little bit higher for seed round funding, and then it drops precipitously in later rounds. So to me, that says like we're making some progress in getting women into the ecosystem, but if you look out, into the later stages, there's a lot of work to do, whether that's women dropping out or, it's hard for anyone to get funding as the business progresses, or it may be sort of knock-on effects from 5 years ago. There weren't as many women getting funding. So I do think we're making more progress than the 2% really like demonstrates on the face of it, but it is still an abysmally low percentage. And I'll say going into the business, having come from a VC-backed environment, and actually one of my best friends who also went to Davidson and was an English major, Jessica Strauss, who I think is involved in the Hurt Hub. She, at the same time as I was at Urban STEM, learning what it was like to be inside of a VC-backed startup, she was the VP of development for the National Venture Capital Association. So she was really learning kind of at the systems level what the whole ecosystem looked like. And that was invaluable information for me to have, because I could see not just what it was like for this like N of one Urban STEMs experience, but how does this whole thing work? And I can't like overstate how valuable I think that was. I just got really lucky that she's like my best friend, and she was kind of working on the other side of the same coin. But I did go into Poppy with a lot of ambivalence around the VC experience. Looking back on it, I think the ambivalence was a lot more in my head than probably I presented, because one of the first things I did was become an EIR for a corporate venture fund in Menlo Park, the summer of 2019. So the VC path was definitely the one that I always kind of expected to take. But I did go through periods of thinking, why do I want to be a part of a club that doesn't want me? Especially not just as a woman founder, but a woman founder in a business where most of our customers are women. The problem we're solving is a problem that is considered a woman's problem, buying wedding flowers. And so I think I brought a lot of expectation into the process, and I found myself being at times like really pleasantly surprised. There were lots of setbacks for sure and disappointments. But I would say some of my biggest advocates have been men in positions of power within the VC sort of community, who are not the ones sitting on panels, with the Twitter bio and like making a big deal out of it, but just quietly making a difference, and using their positions of power and privilege to expand access and opportunity. Chris Langford, I would consider to be at the forefront of that group. And so I think I got really lucky in that the time that I was building the business and starting to talk to VCs, there was just so much more awareness around the sort of the odds against female founders and the inequity in the VC industry. And I think, most VCs are aware of that at this point, whether they're acting on it or not. And that helps, frankly, it helps underrepresented founders, at least just for there to be some awareness. So I think that, overall, I don't have any horror stories. No one harassed me. I think there were times where there probably were investors who overlooked Poppy or overlooked me because I didn't fit, what they might have expected to an entrepreneur to look like. But at the time I just thought you're lost. I'm the best person to build this business. It's a big opportunity. So I'm very competitive, and I think for me it just added fuel to the fire when I felt dismissed because of who I was or the type of problem I was solving. But that it didn't come as a surprise to me. But I would actually say my experience was anomalously positive. And I think I owe a lot of that to having been a part of the Techstars Atlanta program, that's how I got connected to Chris and to Idea Fund. And when I found out that he was as involved as he was with Davidson and the Hurt Hub, it really felt like fate, to be honest. So I guess I want to say, like, I think there's a lot of talk about underrepresented founders and about equity in the VC ecosystem. And what I have found is that the people who talk the loudest aren't necessarily the ones who are kind of putting their money where their mouth is, maybe. And that folks who, there are kind of quiet heroes that are just acting on principle and doing the right thing. And I was surprised and pleasantly surprised by how positive in general my experience was. Now, I think if you had gone back and asked me this at certain points throughout the last 2 years, I would have given a really different response. But I think my experience was overall pretty positive. And I think that my experience working with certain female CEOs has been really positive. We just launched a collaboration with The Still, which is female founded. And, I think also could be perceived as potentially a competitor to us because they sell plants online, we sell flowers online. But the process of working with them was just so incredibly collaborative and positive. It gave me a lot of hope for there being more women in VC-backed startups as founders, because I think the more that we all kind of get into the funnel, the easier it is to pull other people along.
Thank you for all of that. I think it's nice to have that perspective coming out on the other end. I have many, many follow-up questions, but just a quick reminder, because we're getting close to the half hour. Everybody, please submit your questions in the chat and we'll take those in a moment. Let's double click into Techstars a little bit. I've been a Techstars mentor with the Chicago cohort for the last 6 years. It's near and dear to my heart. We've got a Davidson alum, Taylor McLemore, running a Techstars offshoot in Boulder. So Techstars kind of runs deep in the Davidson family. And actually, Umbai Anjai, who was also a guest on Hub and Spoke, right, is in the Atlanta cohort focused on social justice. So anyway, Techstars abounds. Can you explain to everybody what Techstars is and does and why you decided to pursue that path?
Yeah, so Techstars is an accelerator for businesses who have, usually it's before you've raised the seed round. Sometimes you can come in after. And it's kind of like a boot camp, like a 3-month boot camp for CEOs and co-founders to really get everything ready for their business to grow quickly and to fundraise. And I actually wasn't looking to join Techstars. And Taylor, I had been in touch with Taylor for a while, and I was just checking in with him, and he mentioned Dave Payne, who's the managing director of Techstars Atlanta. And I got on a call with Dave, and this was like May 2020. So we had just launched a new line of revenue. We had a great launch. Like, I was feeling really good about Poppy, and I just didn't think I needed help. And the more I talked to Dave, the more I realized there's so much I just didn't know and didn't even know I didn't know. And I also expected, at that point it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and I had no idea what kind of impact that would have on fundraising. And so I thought it was worth doing because I, at that point, was pretty sure I wanted to raise VC, and I wanted to be well positioned to do that. And so I was really clear on what I wanted from Techstars going into it, which was specifically kind of access to this great network and help with fundraising. And it definitely delivered on both of those things. Normally, as you know, the companies that are accepted to each cohort, which are 10 companies a year, are required to move to the city where the group is based. And that didn't happen last year, which actually made it easier for me to say yes, because the idea of picking up and leaving my husband and my dogs and my team and moving to Atlanta for 3 months would have been pretty daunting. So we did the whole thing virtually, which had its upsides and its downsides, I would say. I didn't really get the kind of bonding experience with the other founders that I know we would have had if we had been in person. But on the flip side, I met a lot of investors, including one that invested in Poppy. So it was a really positive experience for me.
That's great. And can you speak, I guess, more about Poppy in general, right? Because I think on the surface, people hear flowers and they're like, "Wait, tech startup? How do these things come together?" And I think we're seeing more of these sort of tech enabled or tech forward or tech first, whatever moniker you want to see. But tell us a little bit more about the business and how you operate.
Yeah, well, I would say first and foremost, well, when I was at Urban Stems, I really did learn the difference between a tech startup where your product is technology and a tech-enabled startup where you may be selling something a more traditional product, but you're doing it differently and in a way that's tech-enabled. With Poppy, it was always my goal for technology to be kind of the heartbeat of the business. But at the end of the day, I think our product is emotion. And where we are focused is in disrupting is a bad word, improving the way people buy wedding flowers. And so the flower industry is about a $15 billion annual industry. And almost half of that goes to wedding and event flowers. And I saw us at Urban Stems pitching investors and saying, like, hey, we're operating within this big industry. And it was clear that, we were only going after a small segment of it. And no venture capital and almost no innovation has gone into digitizing and improving the way that people buy wedding flowers. And it just seemed like a huge opportunity. And on top of that, lots of customers came to Urban Stems saying, we love buying your bouquets. Like, can you do these other types of flowers? And our business structure was so kind of rigidly focused on delivering individual bouquets that we just weren't able to service events or custom orders. And so I knew there was a big opportunity. I know there was demand for it. I'd heard from so many of my friends, how difficult and expensive it was to buy their wedding flowers. And at the same time, I'm a floral designer. So I'd been to all of these floral design workshops where half the time we'd be arranging, the other half, the designers would be desperate for input or guidance or advice on how to be profitable, how to price themselves, how to make money on their orders. And I thought, gosh, like, if customers think this is way too expensive and florists can barely make a margin, like, something's broken here. And we're operating within this, big customer segment that no one has really invested in trying to modernize. And so the sort of structure of the problem seemed really fertile and like interesting to me. But I also knew that we would need to truly differentiate on technology because the consultative sales process of selling wedding flowers is a lot more complicated than point and click, drop it into a cart, e-commerce. And one of the biggest expenses for an independent floral designer is engaging with customers, particularly customers who won't convert. And so I knew that for us to be able to tackle, a venture scale segment of the market, we would need to build technology to facilitate the customer engagement process. And so that's what we have started with. And we've been making a ton of progress on that front. So we've just started this week automating the proposals that we send to customers. So customers come to us and give us some information about what they're looking for their wedding flowers through a fun little style quiz on our site. And our software interprets that information and then develops a proposal, actually in Google Slides, for the customer, pulling in images of actual products that we have created or that we've done a photo shoot of. And on the back end, those images all have floral recipes associated with them, stem prices, the vendor that the stem comes from, the cost, the price that we should be showing the customer. And so we've moved from all that being done manually by a person to, at this point, 90% of our proposals are generated automatically by our software. And just to give you an idea of the impact of that, the cost time, or the time cost of developing those proposals, taking that from almost 100% manual to almost 100% automated, has cut our customer acquisition costs in half. So it's hundreds of dollars that we're saving per sale with that technology. And without it, we wouldn't be able to service a venture scale number of customers, which is what stops most independent floral designers from taking on too many inquiries. So that's kind of, I think, where we're starting from a technology perspective. There's just so much opportunity also within the floral supply chain to introduce technology, particularly with quality control. I think what we've been looking at is integrating computer vision technology at the farms. So we know that when we order a white anemone, they're not sending us a pink one. And it's not a subjective decision. It's, the computer reads Pantone color and we know what color we're getting. So there's some basic things that I think we could do within the supply chain to improve quality control that I'm really excited about too.
That is fantastic. I've almost been married 12 years, but I can, think very clearly about the fact that I put my own PowerPoint presentation together for my florist with some sample, things that I was interested in, and because I'm just that big of a nerd. But anyway, I appreciate that. That's fantastic. We're starting to get some questions coming into the chat. So I have one from Haley Todd. I can't remember if y'all are classmates or not, maybe a year apart. And she says she loves hearing your story in new ways. But since you are an English major, this question probably won't be surprising. She said she loved how you mentioned, I didn't know what I didn't know. Reading is a great way to learn things we didn't even know we didn't know. What books or resources would you recommend for people at the start of their entrepreneurial journey?
Oh, that's such a good question. And yes, Haley and I were just a year apart, but we also went to high school together and played soccer there too. So, and I know Haley is working for a startup now as well. So I would say definitely like anything that Y Combinator publishes. No offense to Techstars, but like the first reading I did around like what's a safe? How do you fundraise before you're talking to VCs? And then like do things that don't scale. So I think a lot of what Y Combinator puts out on their site, I've devoured. Techstars has given us a lot of content. And the book Sprint has been really helpful to me. It's basically the sort of playbook for how within Google Ventures, or maybe it was within Google itself, product design sprints kind of became the framework for how to get things done quickly. And actually the site that we have now, we developed in a 5-day product design sprint with a group in New York called ThoughtBot, September 2019. So I would say Sprint has been really, really helpful. The Innovators Dilemma, Crossing the Chasm, Lean In, and Lean Startup, I think probably are the ones that come to mind first, but nothing totally groundbreaking or new there probably.
I think you're the second storyteller to mention Sprint to us, and I too, my design thinking and design sprints, I got introduced to that when I was at Disney, nearly, I guess, almost 11 years ago or so. And it just is fundamental to how you develop product and how you do things quickly, right? And do that.
And speaking of design thinking, one more book just came to mind. Creative Competence, which is by David Kelly, who's one of the co-founders of IDEO. I read that when I was still at Urban Stems, and I loved it because it provides like a process and a framework for basically how to be creative and kind of demystifies it. And I think it's really empowering for people who don't see themselves as creative to know that there's a way to generate creativity. It doesn't just like come from nowhere.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to this idea, because I think it's sort of in the zeitgeist a little bit, right, of the side hustle. And you talked about flowers being a hobby. And when you knew that, oh, wait, this is much more than a hobby and this could actually be a viable path. Could you kind of rewind to that a little bit and tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, I think honestly, part of it is I was working in communications at a big PR firm, and I just didn't feel excited about my work every day. And I really liked the people I worked with, and some of the projects worked on was really interesting. But overall, I just felt like, oh my gosh, is this it? Is this what it's like to be an adult? This is awful. And I know not everyone has that experience, but I think I thought, like, I just need something that brings me joy. It makes me happy, and that I can be lost in flow within. And, I honestly think part of it is not everyone has things figured out in their 20s, and especially in their early and mid 20s, like a lot of the work that you get is kind of the like grunt work. And so it's not that fun to do anyways. And I didn't have that perspective at the time. But I think I wanted more out of my everyday life. And it took me years, I think, to identify that and then to work on it. And that was all kind of through my early mid 20s. And when I landed on flowers, I felt like I had hit on this thing that I was like, oh, I love this because it's physical. It engages your mind and my aesthetic sense, which I've taken all these tests now and aptitude tests and all this stuff. And I've realized that I have like a sort of artistic aesthetic sense. And so working in an environment that doesn't like stimulate, I think, my aesthetic interest can feel really dulling and sad. And so like having done all these assessments, I realized now why I was so drawn to flowers. But I think I wasn't ready to make a lifestyle change that the careers I could see within the floral industry weren't ones that matched the lifestyle that I was expecting to have. And so it took me a long time to figure out how to meld kind of my like ambition and aspiration with this thing that I knew that I was passionate about. And I honestly like cannot believe how lucky I got that I just stumbled on Urban Stems, and then like my colleague's husband and friend started it. And my colleague and I worked together every day at the drug policy office, and it coincided with me getting involved in the flower shop. So I think it was like I was positioning myself to be available for an opportunity like that, but also just pure dumb luck, honestly. So I think it's kind of a rambling answer. But I think like, I guess just I identified my joy and then took a while to figure out how to like make that my career.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. I mean, obviously you mentioned adulting, and is this all adulting is about, right? When you get there, but there's also financial constraints, right? That you have to be in tune with, and everybody's coming from different places. And so I think your point about you had envisioned a certain lifestyle, obviously that begets, okay, a certain salary level or financial independence or whatever you say there. And I think sometimes, at least when I've had some students come to office hours, there's sort of a very binary, these roles are ones that will get me to that sort of financial place that I'm looking for versus this is something that will bring me joy and does not bring me that financial stability. But I appreciate you saying that there are ways to meld those two. I think that's an important piece to get across.
Totally. Like I used to think it was binary too. Like I was like, I can either continue in corporate communications and become an EVP and hate my life and make a lot of money, or I can like go work for a flower shop and make $12 an hour. And when I faced the financial reality of that, I was like, no, I can't do that. Like I can't do that and keep living in DC and, like whatever. So that's where I felt kind of stuck. And I actually think, the opportunities within startups have proliferated since then. And I see the young people that are working for Poppy now who I'm like, you don't know how good you have it, because you get to do all this cool stuff and you get to take ownership in a growing business and you get to be creative and entrepreneurial. So I actually think startups are kind of where those two things can collide, where like passion and also financial stability can collide. Not that you work at a startup to make big bucks, but like there is financial upside for early employees too. So yeah, I think that's probably what brought me into startup world, is like hoping to combine those two things.
Yeah. Let's dig into that a little bit more, because I know, our primary audience here is Davidson students. And so if we think about entry level positions and getting to a startup, can you talk about maybe not just at Poppy or what you've seen with maybe your other Techstars cohorts of how do you land that first job at a startup if you're coming out of especially a liberal arts background and Davidson type of background? Can you give some advice there?
Honestly, I think Davidson is doing students such a service with Hurt Hub, because Georgetown, we're based in DC. We're now a natively remote team, but we would have been headquartered in DC if the pandemic hadn't happened. And so we, probably half of our team is, or maybe a little bit less, is based in DC. And Georgetown has done a really good job creating a pipeline into startups from their undergrad entrepreneurship track. So, I know the woman who runs that track and who has the class that gives us interns every spring. And one of our, I think she's our youngest employee, we hired her right out of that program. And so these kids get to intern with us, see what it's like. We get to see what it's like to work with them. And then that kind of becomes a pipeline for us. So I think the best thing that a Davidson student could do is get involved with the Hurt Hub. I don't know if and this is not like an infomercial for the Hurt Hub. I just have seen how well it works for Georgetown.
Yep.
And so like Georgetown is like, these kids wouldn't find us on their own. But because they're within the entrepreneurship track in Georgetown, they get fed into different startups. And so I think, if Davidson students are interested in entrepreneurship, I don't know if there is an entrepreneurship major or minor. Definitely, if there isn't, get as involved with our Hurt Hub, get to know Liz as well as you can, because that's going to be your portal to all of these opportunities. That would be my advice, especially now that, so many of us are remote. I would have said, figure out where you want to live and find out what startups are there. But we're hiring all over the country. Like we can hire from wherever. So probably, getting aligned with Hurt Hub and with the entrepreneurship community in Davidson that's the best first thing you can do.
Well, I appreciate you writing the infomercial for us. So thank you very much. And this is recorded, so I appreciate that very much. I think, you make an interesting point too of like building that pipeline early on, as well as this shift to remote native. I think, right? You use that term. I personally think, as someone who's hired people for 16 plus years, at this point that was very geographic centric. You're obviously constrained to whatever that talent pool is in the area, or those who are willing to relocate, et cetera, and so on. How do you see your business fundamentally changing insofar as hiring a team and growing the team now that you are sort of native remote?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a great example. One of the mentors that we met through Mentor Madness in Techstars Atlanta, we had nothing. He was like, I have nothing to offer you. Like, I don't know anything about what you're doing, but you should really talk to my wife, because she ran wedding and event sales for the Books, which is like the biggest, next to Urban Stems, one of the biggest e-commerce flower companies in the country. And they had left LA, where the Books is headquartered, to go to Atlanta so he could work at Cox. And she was working at an event venue, but kind of wanting to get back into that tech startup world. And we ended up hiring her. She's incredible. She's like a huge asset to the team. Never would have considered hiring someone in Atlanta before COVID. And I never would have had the opportunity to meet her if we hadn't been working remotely. And so I would say it has opened up the possibilities for hiring talent, the right talent for this business, because it is pretty niche, but also looking outside of New York, San Francisco, Chicago. I wouldn't consider DC like a tech hub, but there's talent here, but it's really concentrated in the political industry. And depending on the cycle, it's hard to pull people out of that. And they're likely to go back in once they're, whoever they want to run is running. So being able to hire, like we hired our second stateside engineer in Charlotte, actually, just so happened. And she's awesome. She went to Columbia. She's got great experience. And she landed in Charlotte because just kind of like lifestyle reasons after college, and never would have thought of hiring someone in Charlotte necessarily if COVID hadn't happened. So I'm seeing it as a huge boon. I also love working from home. My husband works for Poppy too. And so that's his desk behind me. So we're kind of just talking, thinking about work all the time, which I think is a privilege to love work that much that you want to. But one challenge I would say is like, how do we build company culture remotely? And there just isn't a great solution for that. So, but on the other hand, I think it's a cool opportunity to rethink how people work together and how they spend their time together, and being really intentional about that.
Yeah, that point about culture, I think I'm sure there's many people out in the entrepreneurial ecosystem right now thinking exactly about that point. But I forgot that your husband also worked for Poppy. Could you speak to that a little bit? Think about like, it's interesting. There's lots of stories sort of on both sides of the fence. Like, do you create a true family business, and what that looks like? How do you maintain that balance of work life, especially in that sense?
Yeah, well, I definitely don't consider Poppy a family business, just to be clear. But my husband actually worked in digital strategy and politics for more than a decade at the highest levels of like digital political strategy. And he was a Republican. And after the 2016 cycle, like, honestly, it was just like a bomb got dropped on his career, because he wasn't on the Trump train, neither was I. And the party just kind of got, we all saw what happened, hijacked. And so after that, he parlayed his digital and like tech experience into startups. And so I think we both hit a wall where Poppy was really starting to take off, and he was also working at a startup and had a lot of pressure on him. And we both just kind of looked at it and we're like, I don't think we can have two people doing this in the same house. Like, it's just not going to work. And I saw how he put his heart and soul into these other businesses, and the level of technical expertise that he brought to those companies, and thought like, God, it would be great if you could bring that to Poppy. And so it just felt really natural. And it's also, I'm a solo founder, and a lot of the things that I might share with like an operational co-founder, I was doing myself, and like payroll, basic stuff. And having someone to step in that I really trusted and that I knew could operate at that level, I just had no doubt that he could help and take stuff off my plate that I wouldn't be able to delegate to anyone else. Was honestly also just a huge relief, and like freed up a lot of my headspace and time. So overall, it's just been a positive. I think he would complain that I'm on meetings all the time, and it's hard for him to concentrate because I'm like constantly talking. But yeah, so far it's been great. He and I, when we met, bonded over working on like a project together. Like, we were trying to start our own company basically. And so I think that's kind of how we originally bonded anyways. And so our relationship, I think, has only been enhanced by working together, which isn't always the case. My parents work together, and I see some of the conflict it can create. So like, I'm a little, cognizant of that, but so far so good.
Well, that's good. I'm very glad. It's always an interesting story, because sometimes, you hear the sort of like the Magnolia Homes examples, of like very big celebrity type of couples, and then sometimes not. But I'm glad to hear that. One question that I've asked everybody who's come on the show is really talking about, here at the Hurt Hub, we're trying to build this community of entrepreneurs and innovators, and whether that's from the Davidson College community here, students, faculty, staff, whether it's someone who's living in Cornelius and starting a business and wants to have resources here. One thing, the most important thing that I believe in is reciprocity and how we can help each other. And so you've obviously given so much of your time today and effort, and we very much appreciate that. I'm wondering, do you have a question or a challenge or something that you would like to put out to the community to help us push our thinking on entrepreneurship and innovation, and especially at that intersection of a liberal arts education?
I think that's a great question. I would say, like, not to harp on Georgetown, but I've been really impressed with how much they've invested in an entrepreneurship minor and like a track for students, and how that has become a pipeline for local startups. And I would love to see, especially in this like post-COVID world, I would love to see Davidson create a similar pipeline, because like, I love Georgetown, but I'd love to be able to hire Davidson kids. And I'd love to share learnings from my experience with the sort of academic community here in DC, because I think Davidson students would be so well suited to the types of internships that we have made available to local students. And to me now, there's no different, the kids that we hired this semester, I've never even met them in person, so like, there's no reason why they couldn't be Davidson kids. And so I would say that would be my challenge, is like, let's figure out how to really connect. And the DC tech community is just one example, but just because I'm here, but really connect the like tech communities in different major cities with Davidson in a way that's like really systematic and repeatable year after year. Because that's, I think, the best way to kind of get your foot in the door as a student. And I really like what you guys are doing around sort of offering student services to companies. And I would say, like, double down on that, because that's kind of what I'm suggesting anyways, basically. And yeah, I think really integrating the curriculum with what the Hurt Hub is doing, because I think that also is what I've seen work at other schools is, it's not just that there's an innovation center and it's disconnected from what the kids are learning. It's that they need to be connected and like truly part of the curriculum. And I know that can be tough when there's like kind of pure academia and then there's business. But lots of other schools have done it. So I don't know where Davidson stands on that, but I think what I've seen really work is, the kids at Georgetown are like learning what it's like to be at a startup, or, the basics of fundraising or, marketing strategy or whatever it is. And then they're applying that to their real world experience at the same time, and then presenting back to the other students what they've learned. And so again, I may be speaking out of turn because I don't know. I don't know the half of what's going on at Davidson at this point, but I think I would encourage the school to like truly embrace what you guys are doing and really work on creating a pipeline for students into startups through combining curriculum with the programming that the Hurt Hub is working on.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I like to say we're just getting started, but things like the Gig Hub program, which is what you were referring to, where we're offering students experiential learning opportunities through micro internships, 30 to 40 hours, a very, distinct scope, whether it's marketing, whether it's a web development project or market research, other things, that has certainly been something that we've seen organically be really top of mind for a lot of students, especially because they get paid, but they also get real world experience. So
I think
we're hoping, that Poppy Flowers becomes a client soon. So we can talk more about that as well. But I'm cognizant of our time, and I so thank you for everything that you've shared with us today. Are there any kind of final parting words that you'd like to leave us with before we close out?
I'm really grateful, Liz, that you're doing this job, because you have so much real experience in the tech world. And not just like peripheral, but really doing the job. So I think Davidson's very, very lucky to have you in this role. So thank you for taking it. And secondly, I'm just really happy that the school is investing in innovation and entrepreneurship, because in 2007, when I graduated, I had no idea that I could go work at a startup. And of course, the startup world looked very different then. But I think the fact that the Hurt Hub exists and that it's engaging the broader Davidson community, like alumni community, is an incredible step forward. And I am looking forward to the day when, after Poppy's exit for $1 billion, I can build another wing of the Hurt Hub for you guys.
Oh, well, thank you so much for all of that. You're very, very gracious, and I appreciate you and everybody else who's been part of this community, and certainly am very honored to have this role. So thank you, Cameron. We wish Poppy Flowers all the best of luck in all its endeavors. I will shameless plug here, but for those of you who have not signed up for our newsletter yet, this is the best way to keep in touch with everything that we have going on. We're also in the process of completely redoing and rehauling our website, so stay tuned for that towards the end of April. But do please follow us on social media. For those of you who have followed me on Twitter, you know I'm really active there, as well as our other handles across Instagram and Facebook. So thank you all. Thanks again to Cameron, and we will see you all next week. More details to come on Hub and Spoke. Thanks. Take care, everybody.